welcome once again to David Hathaway, globe-trotting, but I've heard secrets about you, David. Before you started globe-trotting this time, you finished up on a dual carriageway in a fast lane in a classic car, and apparently it was a Wolseley. And what are you doing driving an old Wolseley? You should know that if it's made in Britain, I'm going to be very patriotic now, it's going to break down if it's new, never mind old.
Oh, it's a beautiful car. It's only done 32,000 miles from new.
Oh, golly. Well, I don't know that were the 33,000 miles of dual carriageway when it was built.
Well, it needed some attention and I was on my way to a garage to get it sorted out. But anyway, they're dealing with it now. So yeah, that's
Oh, my
fine.
goodness me. Listen, you've been in Kiev in Ukraine and
Yeah.
they tried to bomb you. What was that about?
Well, it was, I just arrived. It was the night when I'd arrived. And of course, we sleep in the office. It's a house, so we sleep in the office. And that was the night when Putin decided to send 5,000 drones and six or seven of his major missiles. And it was really quite shocking because it shook the house that we were in. And when we looked the next morning, three had landed within about a mile of where we were sleeping. But I lived like you, I lived through the last war. I was in London, and so it doesn't disturb me. And they said to me, "Did you get up and go down into the cellar?" I said, "No, I turned over in bed and pulled the blankets over my head."
Well, that will do the job, won't it? Listen to we've passed from an age of almost being in love with Putin. I remember it was only 2 or 3 years ago when people were saying, "Oh, well, he's supporting what the church believes. Oh, well, he's Russian Orthodox. Therefore, that must be good." And now he seems to have turned the other side of the coin, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, we knew the truth all along that he was trained as a KGB agent, and Kirill, the head of the Orthodox Church, is also a KGB agent. They met up years ago when I was working there. They met up in Geneva and they were influencing the World Council of Churches in those days with all the negatives, because when I was Bible smuggling and preaching behind the Iron Curtain, the World Council of Churches said there was no persecution, that there was absolute religious freedom. But I knew, and I had the facts, that actually tens of thousands, it could run to 100,000 Christians were murdered under the communist regime. And I was preaching in one city in Siberia, and the pastor said to me, he said, "Do you know why you're here?" I said, "Well, no." He said, "You're here because this was the very place where they sent the Christian pastors, the evangelicals, to die." But he said, unlike normal Russians, they didn't die cursing, they died praying that God would send someone to bring the gospel. He said, "You are the answer to their prayers." That's the situation. But you see, the difficulty with the Orthodox Church is that it really denies the truth of the gospel. And um, I mean, the history of Russia's conversion to Orthodoxy goes back hundreds of years, and it started in Kiev, interestingly enough. But it's only about 150, 200 years ago, an English peer, Lord Radstock, had a real challenge to bring the gospel to Russia. And he tried desperately to get a visa, couldn't get one. In fact, his daughter was being trained up to do it, but eventually he got in. And was able, because of his status as a peer, Lord Bradstock, he was able to meet with the wealthier people in Russia, and a revival started. And out of that came the first evangelical church. Basically, it was Baptist. So that was the first breakthrough. But the Orthodox Church has persecuted Christians, evangelical Christians, all the time. In fact, they can't even get on with the Catholics because Pope Francis actually tried to have a meeting with Kirill, and he refused. They're not interested because they don't regard the Catholics. So there is a battle, and what Putin has done is because he has a very strong relationship with Kirill. I mean, they're KGB members together. He really was trying to use religion to boost his cause. And the result of a lot of the propaganda is a lot of people actually think that Putin supports the Christian faith, but he's no Christian. I mean, he's a murderer, he's a war criminal, and I'm sorry, but he is the enemy of the gospel.
And it's just because they were evangelical Christians they were persecuted.
Well, no, because the communists did persecute the Orthodox as well. And they actually destroyed a number of Orthodox churches. And many of the Orthodox priests were killed along with the evangelicals. But the only way to survive under communism, whether you were Orthodox or evangelical, was to compromise totally with the state. And that meant you could live, you were allowed to survive. And but the compromise was so deadly. I mean, I was working there for 30 years under this, and if you were compromised, it meant that you had to show your sermon to the communists before you preached it, and if they didn't like it, you didn't preach it. And every Monday you had to visit the local KGB and give the names and addresses of everybody in your congregation. I mean, that's why under communism they developed what was called the underground church. Now, I couldn't work with the recognized church. I could only work with the underground church. Now, underground, it didn't mean they were literally underground. It meant they were non-registered. So really, the official definition was you either a registered or a non-registered church. If you were non-registered, that's where they would stop you if they could. But they were the only ones that would handle the Bible smuggling.
I mean, I think of China, David, they're in a similar situation, aren't they? Is it Marxism that's caused all this?
It's Marxism, yes. But the tragedy is, and I feel really very upset, Rodney, because I worked for 30 years and was imprisoned under the communist system. I mean, I worked from 1961 till the breakthrough came in the 1990s. But now what you've got is that most of the churches in Russia, the evangelical and Pentecostal churches in Russia, have compromised. And I mean, they're my friends. I know them and I know what they're saying. They actually say that Putin is right and are against Ukraine. But it's so bad that the Alpha Course and the one who organizes the Alpha Course in those countries is a friend of mine. In fact, he's on the board of my mission in Poland. His home's in Poland. And he told me that Alpha have had to come out of Russia and have removed their central office to Kazakhstan, which is where we're working. But the reason they've had to come out is they cannot work with the churches because they are so compromised. And to me, this is terrible because under communism, under threat of death, you still had the remnant, the underground church, who remained faithful. But now we can't see an underground church. It seems that all the people that I knew were evangelized, they're compromised.
Mm.
And I can name some of them. I mean, Rick Rayner, who he's American and has the biggest church in Moscow, and is a friend of mine. I preached in his church. We were good friends, but I know people that worked in the church, and but he's saying that Putin is right and Ukraine is wrong, and they're spreading a news that Zelensky in Ukraine is destroying the church. He's not. I mean, I'm there. I was there, just a couple of weeks ago. The evangelical churches are thriving despite the war. We had a day of prayer under the bombing with 3,000 people from every denomination. And if you look at the pictures, yes, we've got the Russian, not the Russian Orthodox, we've got the Ukrainian Orthodox. And the only church that is banned is the Russian Orthodox Church, because they found they were acting as spies for Putin. So they've had to ban them. And they found all sorts of documents in the Russian Orthodox Church. So I'm very friendly with the Ukrainian Orthodox because we bring them all together, Catholics, Pentecostals, we have every denomination, but we unite in prayer, and we can only unite all these denominations if they agree two things. One, that the Bible is the only authority in the church, and that salvation is only in the name of Jesus. And to me, that's the basis. If you've got that, if you agree that, we can work together. And we are. But the churches are working. I mean, I'll tell you what happened. This happened just when I was there, just in June. And we'd got this big meeting planned. We couldn't use the main big one, the auditorium with 10,000, because we were forced to use a 3,000 seat stadium because they'd got an air raid shelter. And the condition of our having it was that there had to be an air raid shelter, and if there was an air raid warning, we had to close the service and everybody had to go to the shelter. And in the gathering, of the staff just before the meeting started, Vadim, who's my agent there, who organizes it, he just warned us all, if there is an air raid warning, the government insists, and the directors of the auditorium insist, we close the meeting, you go to the air raid shelter. But the amazing thing is that the service, which was to last for just over 3 hours, 30 minutes into the meeting, there was an air raid warning. And the director of the hall went to the leaders and said, the government says you have to close the service. They refused. And they didn't close the service. And by a miracle, it wasn't drones. It was just, I think, 3 of the missiles, which didn't land anywhere near the hall. But actually, our leaders would have gone to prison if anything had happened to the hall. But it was a very powerful meeting. We reckon it was the most powerful meeting we've had in 7 years. Because, people need God. They're crying out to God and they're praying. And I spoke and I encouraged them and lead them and showed the power of God to answer prayer. So that's the situation. But unfortunately, there are a lot of false reports on the internet. You may have seen in the paper, it's in, I think, yesterday's paper, that from America, a man with his family didn't like the woke regime in America, and that he was upset because his daughter had to accept lesbians in the school and actually not only accept them, but speak publicly to accept them. She refused. So he moved to Russia. It's yes, the headlines in the paper yesterday. He moved to Russia with his wife and I think 3 children, thinking that it was a better civilization, thinking, look, we've got more freedom here. We don't have this rubbish that there is in America and in England. What happened to him? Within a short time of arriving, he was sent to the military, to the front line. Now his family haven't heard from him for the last month. So that's what happened to him. But you see, that shows a truer situation of what's going on in Russia.
Two things, David. First of all, you mentioned the two important things that bound people together and still bind
Yeah,
people together, whatever denomination,
yeah.
with the ultimate authority of the Bible. Am I surprised that the Roman Catholics are joining in?
Well, no, because I'm very friendly with the head Catholic Archbishop. He's a personal friend of mine, but he does accept the truth of the Bible. And the very fact that he's supporting the meetings is an indication. They all know that that's the stand. I met the head of every denomination, whatever they were, whether Pentecostal or Baptist. I had to meet the head. I met this guy, this Catholic. I met the head of the Ukrainian Orthodox. And in the beginning, the government asked me even to meet the Russian Orthodox. But I'm afraid eventually we had to exclude them. But all the others joined, Seventh-day Adventists, they all come and support us in the meeting because we've got to have unity in prayer. In a nation at war, it's like in England during the last war when the king called days of prayer. The churches were full. All the churches were filled, whatever denomination, because people realized only God can solve the problem. And part of the gospel is showing people only God is the answer. And the whole reason why I started these days of prayer was by simply telling them. I said, look, the military wants that this is in 22, 4 days before the war started. Well, no, it went back to 2016 when I first started it, before this last war, because the war started in 2014, actually. And I said to the people, I said, the military won't solve it, the politicians won't solve it, only God. And I mean, that's the desperate cry. It should be the cry of the church, only God. I mean, there's one preacher in America who's got the biggest congregation in America. And I was looking at an interview with him only yesterday in which he was saying 99% of the people are good. And he said, I encourage them. But the answer is, as somebody said to him, but the Bible says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's no righteous. We're all sinners and we all need the gospel. We all need Jesus. And there's no other way into the kingdom of heaven, as you know, Rodney, only by the cross of Christ. And so, no, the church has got to face the truth. Only Jesus can save. And I do believe, I was very strong in my preaching, I do believe as a result of that last day of prayer, this war will come to an end. Putin will lose and all the Russians will leave the Ukraine. Well, that's what we prayed. I had the whole congregation praying that. And it will happen. It has to happen.
I'm going back to America now again. The second point I want to make with you is that Trump thought he'd do the famous thing and settle this problem in 24 hours. Now, clearly that's not happened. You yourself and I thought that this will be over a lot quicker than it was. What's going on?
Well, I can tell you what's going on. Trump, yes, he did say that he would end the war. In fact, he said if he'd been president, the war wouldn't have started. But it's because he has a financial agreement with Putin, and Trump believed that if he put financial pressure on Putin, that the war would stop. But Putin isn't betrayed by that. But you see, I know Trump, yes, we all thought, I mean, Christians were supporting Trump in America, believing that he would support the churches and so on. But you've got to look at the man's life. You've got to look at the man's background. I mean, he desperately wanted the support of Christians to win the election, and without the Christians, he wouldn't be president. But I'm sorry, but to work with him, you have to compromise because I mean, you know what's coming out now with all the files about Trump. And I don't have to be a prophet to say that Trump isn't going to last much longer. He won't see this year out. He won't be president at the end of this year. He can't, the way things are going. But it means that the whole world is in turmoil because Russia is becoming bankrupt. Russia is now literally bankrupt, can't survive much longer. America is in trouble because the president isn't governing the country properly. What Trump is trying to do is he met Putin and said, I like the man, I like the way he rules. He went to Saudi Arabia and said publicly on television, I like the way you govern your country. That's totalitarian rule. And that's what the danger is with Trump. He's overriding government. And in his first 6 months, he's ruled by presidential declaration, not by normal government. And it's dangerous. And the whole world is in a dangerous situation and is leading up to the return of Christ. The political situation, look at Israel, look what's happening there. I support Israel, and I know why they're doing it, but what they're doing is terrible. I mean, it is what they're doing in Gaza. But what alternative do they have? Because all the time that Hamas control Gaza, Israel has a problem, and they've got to be rooted out. There are times when you've got to root out the evil and get rid of it, but that's not easy to do that. But the whole world is in turmoil. I don't know anywhere where I would say there is real peace. Even in Europe, governments are unstable. In Britain, well, I don't want to talk about Britain because I would say we really don't have proper government in Britain at the moment. Starmer is not a leader. I mean, he's not a leader. He was a lawyer, and he's not a leader. And unfortunately, the people that he surrounds himself with in the government don't understand economics. They don't understand government. Oh, God help us. And again, I think it's time we started to really pray in Britain. Oh, God help us. We're in trouble. So the sooner Jesus comes back, the better.
Surely Britain is in a very dark place at the moment. Now, on a physical level, on a personal level, with all the new parties on the horizon, one looks at Farage. Is there any hope with him?
Well, I mean, I don't hold out hope with political parties. At the end of it, it's like in the Ukraine, only God can solve the problem. And what we need in Britain is to get back to God. I mean, when you look, for example, at two things, one is crime. I mean, look, shoplifting now is not a crime. The police won't touch it. If someone breaks into your house, the police won't come and arrest anybody. They'll give you a crime number. I know my house was broken into some years ago. And what's happening is this: there is no sense of godliness, no morality. The children are not taught the difference between right and wrong. And so there's no respect for the law, there's no respect for honesty, there's no respect for morality. And why? Because if you turn away from God, what you're left with? And the whole nation will only be saved if it turns back to God. Now, historically, that has happened. It has happened where the nation, in the time of the Wesleys, the nation was possibly even worse than it is now. But the preaching of the gospel saved the nation, brought us back. And the only thing that can save the nation now is to turn back to God. But that begins in the church. The Bible is very clear. Revival must begin in the house of God. And until the house of God cleanses and gets itself right. But I'm praying and believing. I've been very involved. I've had two major meetings in England, celebrating 75 years of ministry. And the last one, which is only just over a week ago in London, was a very, very powerful meeting. And I'm wondering whether God is actually telling me, Rodney, that I've got to start working back in England. I'm praying over it now.
Certainly, the advice that you would give to the ordinary person in the pew in Britain who may be timid about the things and they don't want to put their head above the parapet. They don't want to stir things up. They're hoping that a solution will be found. What advice would you give to them?
Stick your head above the parapet. We've got to do that. I mean, I've done this all my life. I've always done the impossible things. God is with you. If you will stand up for truth and righteousness, God is with you, and God cannot be defeated. And my message is this: in 6,000 years of Bible history, God has never, ever been defeated. And I, for one, Rodney, declare I will not allow God to be defeated now. And Christians, stand up for what you believe in. Pray, call upon God. God is a prayer answering God. Don't be afraid. Stand for the truth. Because I was listening to a preacher last Sunday. I slip into a church which is big and nobody knows me, and I hide at the back. And the preacher said two strong things. He said, as Christians, we need to know two things. The first, we are servants. We're number two, not number one. We're servants of God. And the second is God calls us to make sacrifice. And those are the things I would leave with you, Rodney. God's calling Christians to become servants and to be prepared to sacrifice. And that's what the Bible says. That's 100% the Bible.
David, thank you so much for the inspiration. And we need some courage to go with the inspiration, don't we?
We certainly do. But don't worry. Despite my age, I'm going on and I refuse to stop. So I'll talk to you again. I'm off to my prayer mountain this week, and I'm going to spend a week on the mountains in prayer and really praying into the situation.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. God bless you, Rodney.